In 897 AD, the Catholic Church put a dead pope on trial. They dressed his corpse in full papal robes, sat him upright on a throne inside St. John Lateran Basilica, and read out charges of perjury and corruption. A real courtroom. A real corpse. And when the trial ended, the corpse was found guilty. Rome had seen its share of madness, but nothing like this. The eternal city smelled of incense and decay. The marble halls that once echoed the Latin of saints now carried whispers of vengeance. Behind the candles and the relics, behind the chants of mercy, the church had become a theater of power. To understand why a dead man was dragged from his tomb to stand before living judges, we have to walk back through the ashes of the late 9th century, an age when popes were pawns, emperors were ghosts, and Rome was a carcass fought over by wolves. The Western Roman Empire had been dead for 400 years, but its ghost still haunted every crown and mitre. Whoever ruled the papacy ruled the memory of Rome, and memory was power. By the year 870, the papal throne was less a seat of holiness than a weapon in an endless civil war between the Carolingian heirs, Italian dukes, and Roman nobles. Each faction wanted its own pope, and each pope came with promises: absolution, land, legitimacy. Into this chaos stepped Formosus, a bishop of Portus near the Tiber. He was brilliant, ambitious, and very Roman, a man who understood that holiness without leverage was suicide. For years he had tried to survive shifting alliances between Frankish kings and local warlords. He'd been excommunicated once, forgiven once, exiled, reinstated, and finally elected pope in 891. When Formosus took the throne, he inherited a papacy drenched in blood. His predecessor had been strangled. His successor would be. The line between saint and corpse was paper-thin. Formosus had a single dream: to unify Italy under a strong ruler who could protect Rome from its own predators. He invited Arnulf of Carinthia, a Frankish king from beyond the Alps, to come to Italy, crown him emperor, and bring order to the peninsula. Arnulf marched south, defeated rivals, and was crowned by Formosus in 896. But soon after, the old pope fell ill. His body began to fail, even as his plans reached their peak. Within months, he was dead, buried in the Basilica of St. Peter's. His death should have been the end of the story. But in the papal palace, hatred doesn't die with the body. Formosus had enemies, Roman aristocrats who'd lost land under his rule, bishops loyal to rival emperors, and one especially vindictive cleric, Stephen VI. Stephen owed his career to the same factions Formosus had betrayed. When Formosus elevated him to bishop, it was a political necessity, not affection. The two men despised each other. To Stephen, Formosus was a usurper who had defiled sacred order by calling a foreign army into Italy. When Stephen became pope barely a year later, his mind burned with resentment. The corpse of Formosus still lay in its marble tomb, revered by the people as a reformer. To erase him from memory, Stephen decided not to rewrite history, but to retry it. And so the stage was set for the Cadaver Synod. Rome in 897 was a city of contrasts: sunlit domes and shadowed alleys, relics of empire alongside heaps of ruin. Pilgrims came to kiss the bones of saints, while soldiers looted the forum for bricks. The papacy ruled, but its authority rested on mercenaries and bribes. When word spread that Pope Stephen planned to hold a posthumous trial, people laughed at first. Surely, they said, it was a rumor born of taverns. But the invitations went out. Bishops were summoned. The basilica was prepared. The tomb of Pope Formosus was opened. The smell must have been unspeakable. 7 months in Roman heat had left little of the man except shriveled flesh and brittle bone. Yet servants washed the corpse, dressed it again in the white and gold of pontifical vestments, placed the tiara on its skull, and sat it upon a throne before the council. The audience gathered in disbelief. Cardinals, deacons, nobles, and guards filled the basilica. Torches flickered, and in that half-light, the dead pope seemed to watch them with hollow sockets. Beside him stood a young deacon, a terrified boy ordered to act as the corpse's defense attorney. Each time Pope Stephen thundered an accusation, the deacon had to lean toward the corpse and answer on its behalf. Formosus, accused of perjury, accused of violating canon law, accused of seizing the papal throne unlawfully. The deacon whispered his timid defense. The crowd murmured prayers and crossed themselves. Then Stephen's voice rose above the chanting. "Why did you, Bishop Formosus, usurp the apostolic see?" Silence. Only the creak of wood, the hiss of candles. The boy answered for the corpse. Because he was compelled by the necessities of the church, Stephen slammed his fist. He was not seeking justice, he was performing domination. Outside, Rome buzzed with rumors. Some said Stephen had gone mad, others said he was possessed. Yet the council continued, and the verdict was inevitable. Guilty. The dead pope was stripped of his vestments. The 3 fingers he had used to bless the faithful were cut off. His body was dragged through the basilica, the robes torn, the tiara smashed. Finally, the corpse was thrown into the Tiber River. But the river does not keep secrets. Days later, fishermen found the body tangled in reeds. They claimed miracles occurred where it floated ashore. The legend spread. Formosus, even in death, had triumphed over his accuser. For Stephen VI, the spectacle that should have cemented his power instead became his curse. Long before his corpse was dragged through the basilica, Formosus had been one of the most respected men in Christendom. He was a diplomat in a world that worshipped intrigue. He spoke the language of scripture and the dialect of survival. Born around 816 AD, he rose quickly through church ranks. By his 40s, he was Bishop of Portus, a crucial post guarding the mouth of the Tiber, gateway to Rome. His reputation for intelligence and tact earned him the trust of popes and kings alike. He was sent north to negotiate with the Bulgarian Tsar, with Carolingian princes, with anyone whose signature might keep the church from bleeding out. But every negotiation in that age planted a new enemy. The papal throne was no longer chosen by divine inspiration, but by who could out-scheme the others. Formosus's skill made him valuable, and therefore dangerous. In 872, he became a candidate for pope, and immediately found himself accused of treachery. His rivals claimed he had sworn never to set foot in Rome again without permission. The charge was absurd, but it stuck. He was excommunicated, exiled, then quietly forgiven when a new faction took power. This cycle of sin and absolution was the rhythm of Roman politics. When he finally became pope in 891, the empire around him was collapsing in slow motion. Barbarian raids scarred the countryside, famine swept the Tiber Valley, and petty dukes carved Italy into feudal shards. The papacy needed muscle. Formosus believed salvation lay beyond the Alps, in the arms of the Frankish king Arnulf of Carinthia. He invited Arnulf to cross the mountains, defeat his Italian rival Lambert of Spoleto, and restore the old imperial dignity. Arnulf came. His soldiers marched beneath banners, embroidered with the cross and the eagle. When he entered Rome in 896, the people hailed him as the new Charlemagne. Formosus crowned him emperor in St. Peter's, the last great ceremony of his life. But Arnulf suffered a stroke within weeks, paralyzed, carried back north in a litter. The miracle collapsed, and the Roman nobles who had supported Lambert began to plot revenge. To them, Formosus was a traitor who had invited foreign swords into Italy. He died soon after, perhaps of stroke or poison. Rumors disagree. He was buried in peace, but peace was never meant to last. In 897, Stephen VI rose to the papal throne with Lambert's backing. Stephen was unstable, a man shaped by humiliation, both political and personal. He saw Formosus's corpse as a weapon, proof that anyone who defied his faction, even in death, could be destroyed. The synod that followed would turn vengeance into liturgy. January 897. The Basilica of St. John Lateran stood like a marble crypt under winter light. Within its walls, Rome's elite gathered to witness what none had seen before. a trial without life. At the center sat the corpse of Pope Formosus, propped on a throne. His skin had blackened, his hands curled like claws. He wore the robes of office, the tiara perched awkwardly on a skull, half collapsed from decay. On either side stood bishops summoned by Stephen VI, men pale with fear. To defy him was to risk the same fate. The air was thick with incense, meant to mask the stench. Stephen entered in crimson vestments, face gaunt, eyes alight with fury. Before him lay not justice but theater, the final act of a feud that had devoured popes and princes. He read the charges: usurpation of the papal seat, perjury, violating canon law by serving as Bishop of Portus while becoming pope. Every accusation was political jargon for the same crime: choosing the wrong allies. A deacon, barely 17, had been appointed to speak for the corpse. When Stephen asked his questions, "Why did you defile this sacred office?" the boy trembled and whispered replies, as if the dead man might hear him. The congregation shifted uneasily. Some crossed themselves, others watched with morbid fascination. For hours, Stephen shouted, pacing before the throne. He gestured at the withered hands. "See how corruption clings even in death," he cried. He called down God's wrath, but behind the frenzy was calculation. Each bishop who nodded in agreement was binding himself to Stephen's rule. Each who hesitated marked himself an enemy. At last, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. Servants stripped the corpse of its vestments, tearing silk and linen until only the bones showed through. Stephen ordered the 3 blessing fingers severed. Then, before the horrified assembly, he decreed that all acts performed by Formosus, ordinations, baptisms, consecrations, were void. An entire generation of priests found their status erased with a single shout. The spectacle ended in violence. Guards dragged the body through the basilica, down the steps, and into the streets. Dogs barked as the procession wound toward the Tiber. There, at the edge of the bridge, they flung the corpse into the river. For a moment, the water swallowed him. Then, legend says, a sudden storm broke, waves thrashing against the walls, as if the river itself rejected the blasphemy. Days later, fishermen found the body washed ashore, tangled in reeds near the Ponte Sant'Angelo. Rumors of miracles followed. Those who had feared Stephen now whispered that Formosus's spirit haunted the papal palace. The Cadaver Synod achieved the opposite of what Stephen intended. Instead of securing his throne, it ignited revolt. Romans, already weary of corruption, saw the trial as an abomination. Riots flared, mobs filled the streets shouting curses against the living pope. Bishops fled the city in disguise. By the summer of 897, Stephen VI was arrested by his own guards. He was imprisoned in the same cell where Formosus's allies had once awaited execution. One night in August, the guards strangled him with a cord. His corpse was dumped in a common grave. The irony was not lost on Rome. The man who had condemned a corpse became one. The new pope, Theodore II, reigned for only 20 days, but in that brief span he ordered Formosus's body recovered from the river and reburied with honors. He annulled the Cadaver Synod and reinstated all the sacraments Stephen had voided. Peace, however, was temporary. A few years later, another faction revived the charges, dug up the body once more, and placed it on trial again, a grotesque echo of the first. It seemed Rome could not stop fighting over bones. Through the next decades, papal politics remained a carousel of revenge. Popes rose and fell like emperors of a dying empire. Each new ruler rewrote the past to justify the present. By the time stability returned, the story of the Cadaver Synod had already slipped into legend, a cautionary tale whispered in monasteries. Even the saints can be judged twice. Centuries later, scholars would argue whether Stephen VI was insane or merely desperate. Contemporary records call him possessed by fury. Modern historians call him a man trapped in a system where survival demanded spectacle. Whatever his motives, the Cadaver Synod remains the most literal expression of medieval power. The living, judging the dead to control the living. Art and literature remembered it as nightmare theater. In frescoes, painters showed the corpse upright on a throne, robes shimmering like wax, eyes hollow. Poets imagined the rivers of Rome whispering the dead pope's name each spring. For theologians, it symbolized the church's flirtation with madness. For cynics, proof that power corrupts absolutely. Yet beneath the horror lies something deeply human, the obsession with vindication. Stephen could not defeat Formosus in life, so he sought to erase him in death. He turned the courtroom into confession, the corpse into a mirror. In trying to prove himself holy, he revealed how fragile holiness had become. By the time the high Middle Ages dawned, the church tried to bury the memory. Documents disappeared, records rewritten. But the tale survived in whispers, then in chronicles, and finally in every history of the papacy. It endures because it captures an uncomfortable truth. Even institutions built on eternity can decay like flesh. Today, the phrase Cadaver Synod stands as shorthand for absurdity, for politics so poisoned that the dead are dragged back to fight the living. It's been used in parliaments, in editorials, in films, as metaphor for every moment when vengeance outweighs reason. Picture that basilica again. The candles, the corpse, the Pope shouting accusations into silence. That scene is not just medieval, it is timeless. Every era has its Cadaver Synod, its trial of ghosts, its desperate attempt to control memory through spectacle. Formosus, whatever his sins, became immortal not by sanctity, but by scandal. Stephen VI, whatever his victories, became a warning carved into every history book. In the end, both men proved that power built on fear always turns to dust.